In this video, we dive into the 6 worst live TV deaths in history. From a live escape stunt pushed beyond its time limit inside a sealed setup to a TV professional refusing to stop a dangerous on-air demonstration in the worst way possible. It was June 12, 2015 in Las Vegas, Nevada. A live network stunt special was airing inside a packed theater, with camera rigs and stage lighting focused on a reinforced platform prepared for a real-time televised escape burial. Johnny Beaverton, 32, was the featured escape artist for the broadcast. He had spent over 10 years performing restraint and confinement escapes across regional venues and touring shows, building a reputation for technically precise, repeatable acts rather than spectacle improvisation. His burial escape had been completed more than 100 times using a standard enclosed box and layered soil. For the live special, production requested a modified version using a transparent reinforced chamber, so cameras could capture his movements. Crew notes showed Johnny had completed partial rehearsals with the unit, but not under full burial weight. It also included a concealed low-flow airline rated for 15 minutes, built into the rear frame and tested during rehearsal. A chest strap heart rate monitor transmitted directly to the broadcast graphics system. Instead of dry soil, damp sand was selected because it settled smoothly on camera and reduced dust interference with lighting. Engineering staff approved the structure, but prep logs noted the total load weight was higher than Johnny's standard setup and required a revised base support plate beneath the chamber. Setup took place the afternoon of the broadcast. Sand was compacted in layers over the support frame. Later measurements documented uneven density across the platform surface, creating minor load imbalance points. The stunt included 2 safety systems, an internal mechanical release Johnny could trigger himself, and an external hatch override controlled by the stunt safety team. Because broadcast continuity rules required the stunt window to pass a minimum timer mark before standard hatch access. The external hatch was fitted with a timer-linked lock that prevented opening before a set mark unless a hard override key was used. That override key was stored at a secondary tool station behind the primary rail position. 8 minutes into the live burial, Johnny's heart rate rose faster than rehearsal baselines. His internal movement appeared more restricted than test footage showed. Under the uneven load, one lower support plate shifted slightly, transferring pressure toward the front frame. The distortion reduced clearance around the internal release linkage. When Johnny initiated the first escape step, the mechanism failed to travel its full range. The biometric overlay continued updating on viewers' screens. Elevated readings were initially interpreted by the control room as expected exertion within the planned struggle window, described during rehearsal briefings. The safety team remained in position, but standard entry required either timer clearance or the physical override key. When motion inside the chamber decreased sharply and the telemetry pattern turned irregular, the director called an abort. Crew began partial manual sand removal while the safety supervisor retrieved the override key and bypassed the hatch lock. The chamber was opened, but total access time exceeded survivable limits under compression and restricted airflow. On-site medics entered immediately and began resuscitation procedures without success. Beaverton was pronounced dead shortly after extraction. The medical finding listed compressive asphyxia with secondary oxygen deprivation as the cause of death. The formal investigation determined the fatal delay resulted from combined factors: increased apparatus weight, uneven base compaction, frame distortion, and a broadcast-linked hatch lock that slowed external access. Subsequent industry safety advisories prohibited timer-dependent locks on live escape stunts and required independent, instantly accessible mechanical overrides. It was May 8, 2014, in Birmingham, Alabama. A live morning weather segment was underway in the parking lot of a regional news station as a supercell storm system approached the metro area. Broadcast vans were staged near the building, with a fixed camera and weather instruments set up to show real-time conditions as the storm advanced toward the city. David Chen, 51, was the station's chief meteorologist and had worked in on-air forecasting for more than 20 years. He was known locally for field demonstrations during severe weather, occasionally stepping outside the studio to show wind, rainfall, or hail intensity firsthand. His reporting style focused on practical safety guidance and visual examples, rather than studio graphics alone. In the days leading up to the broadcast, forecast models showed a volatile system capable of producing large hail and strong downdrafts, though early projections placed the most intense core slightly north of the station's location. Station planning notes showed the live segment was approved with safeguards. A news vehicle was positioned within a short sprint distance, and David wore a hard helmet with a clear face shield typically used for small hail and debris. The camera operator was placed behind a low concrete wall near the building entrance, using a zoom lens to maintain distance. The plan called for the segment to end once hail size exceeded safe demonstration limits, at which point the crew would move indoors and continue coverage from radar feeds. The live shot began shortly after 6:15 a.m. Light rain and small hail started within minutes, visibly bouncing off the asphalt. David demonstrated hail size comparisons using marked reference cards and advised viewers to avoid windows and seek solid cover. Wind speed increased rapidly as the storm cell shifted track. Radar updates relayed to the control room showed the high-intensity core trending closer than earlier projections indicated. Hail size increased from marble to golf ball diameter in less than 2 minutes. Impacts became loud enough to register clearly on the broadcast microphones. David moved toward the news van as planned, using it as partial cover while continuing to speak to camera. As he reached the vehicle, a cluster of larger hailstones struck the windshield and hood almost simultaneously. One impact fractured the outer layer of the windshield glass, sending a burst of laminated shards inward through the already lowered side window opening used for cable routing. David recoiled and lost footing on the accumulating hailstones underfoot. He fell backward onto the pavement, striking the rear of his head against the curb edge beside the parking divider. The camera, still live, captured the fall from a distance as the operator took cover from the intensifying impacts. The segment audio recorded the control room calling for an immediate cut as the signal switched back to studio radar. Crew members reached David within seconds, once the largest hail burst past. On-site staff initiated first aid, while emergency services, already on severe weather standby, were dispatched to the station. He was transported to a nearby hospital with severe head trauma and skull fracture. He did not regain consciousness and was pronounced dead later that morning. The incident review concluded that the fatal injury resulted from secondary impact trauma during rapid hail escalation, not direct hailstone penetration. The station updated its field demonstration policy to prohibit outdoor live shots once hail exceeded preset size thresholds, and required all severe weather segments to maintain fully enclosed shelter positions. It was May 22, 2018, in the Phoenix metro area. A live evening broadcast was underway inside a small community college television studio, where a student-produced talk show focused on local civic issues and investigative reporting. The set was built in a converted media classroom with fixed cameras, overhead lights, and a live switcher feeding directly to a regional cable access channel. The episode's featured guest was an independent journalist scheduled to discuss a recent investigation into municipal contracting irregularities. Sarah Kim, 28, worked as a freelance investigative reporter covering local procurement and zoning disputes. Over 5 years, she had published several documented reports involving bid favoritism and shell subcontractors tied to mid-level officials and private developers. Her work had drawn legal threats and hostile messages, but no confirmed direct attacks. The live studio appearance was arranged to summarize her findings and explain how public records requests were used in her reporting process. Production notes described the episode as higher interest than usual, but not classified as high security risk. The studio operated with a small crew of students and one faculty supervisor. Standard procedure required exterior doors to remain locked during live broadcasts, with entry routed through a monitored front desk. A secondary side corridor door near the studio was normally alarmed, but had been set to maintenance mode earlier that afternoon for equipment deliveries, and the door was physically wedged open for repeated load-in trips. The alert had not been rearmed before airtime. Interior hallway cameras were present, but not actively monitored during the show because the control station was focused on switching the live program feed. The interview began shortly after 7:30 p.m. and proceeded normally through the first segment. Sarah discussed document trails, contract layering, and oversight gaps, while the host reviewed graphics prepared by the student staff. Approximately 20 minutes into the live broadcast, a man entered through the side corridor door and walked toward the studio floor. Video later reviewed from the hallway camera showed he wore a delivery vest and carried a small tool bag, which matched the type commonly seen during earlier equipment drop-offs that day. The individual stepped onto the set edge within camera frame while the segment was still live. Crew members initially interpreted the approach as a late technical adjustment because maintenance staff had moved through the area earlier. The man closed distance to the guest position and produced a concealed handgun at close range. The live camera feed captured the immediate confrontation and Sarah's collapse after a single shot. The director cut to a standby graphic within seconds, as audio was muted and the studio feed was terminated. Campus security and city police units arrived within minutes and secured the building. Paramedics confirmed Sarah Kim was dead at the scene from a gunshot wound. The suspect, later identified as Daniel Ruiz, 41, was located that night during a traffic stop and taken into custody without further incident. Court records show he was charged with first-degree murder and illegal firearm possession, later convicted and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Investigators found no organized crime links and concluded the motive was a personal grievance tied to a company named in one of Kim's published investigations. The official review cited multiple security failures, including a disabled side door alarm and no dedicated access monitor during the live broadcast. Updated campus broadcast rules later required verified alarm status, controlled entry staffing, and a designated floor safety marshal for all live shows. It was October 31st, 2016, in a coastal town in Massachusetts. A live Halloween broadcast was underway inside a restored 17th century house museum that operated as a seasonal tourist site. The program was produced by a local access television station using portable lighting, handheld cameras, and temporary cabling. The special featured a real-time paranormal-themed walkthrough designed to hold a continuous live feed as the host moved through different rooms of the building. Derek Sullivan, 34, was the on-air host of the special. He had spent years in local theater before moving into small-market television, where he became known for hosting holiday and event programming. His style leaned heavily on atmosphere and improvisation, rather than technical production. The Halloween episode was his most ambitious live project, built around an overnight investigation format with rotating guests and staged lighting effects. Station records described the production as low budget, with most equipment supplied by volunteers and short-term rentals rather than permanent studio gear. Preparation for the broadcast included a basic site walkthrough and limited safety review. The building's electrical system had been partially modernized, but several lower-level circuits remained tied to older wiring runs. Maintenance logs noted prior moisture intrusion after heavy rain earlier that month, especially in storage areas below ground level. Some outlets and junction points had been tagged for future repair, and at least one basement circuit cover plate was listed as missing, with a temporary barrier recommended until replacement. The television crew routed extension lines for lights and cameras through a rear access corridor and into the basement to reduce cable visibility on the main floors. The live program began shortly after 9 p.m. Derek moved room to room with a shoulder-mounted camera operator, while portable lights created high-contrast shadows for effect. Viewers watched as he demonstrated temperature meters and handheld sensors, while describing reported disturbances tied to the building's history. Minor lighting fluctuations occurred during the first hour, consistent with load changes from temporary production equipment. According to the later incident report, additional fixtures had been connected to an already stressed circuit shortly before the basement segment. Midway through the broadcast, Derek led the crew into the lower level, which was normally closed to the public and used for storage. The space had exposed beams, surface wiring, and a wall-mounted electrical panel with adjacent junction boxes. While attempting to darken and relight sections of the basement for visual effect, Derek reached toward what he believed was a lighting control switch near the panel. Instead, his hand contacted an uncovered metal junction box containing a live conductor splice tied to a temporary lighting tap. The contact created a direct fault path through his hand and forearm. Video showed an immediate muscular lock response followed by collapse. The camera remained live for several seconds as the operator stepped back, and the frame dropped toward the floor. The control room cut the feed once the loss of responsiveness was recognized. Crew members on site disconnected power at the main breaker and began first aid within minutes. Emergency services arrived shortly afterward and continued resuscitation attempts. Derek Sullivan was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical finding listed fatal electrical shock as the cause of death. The post-incident inspection documented multiple electrical hazards in the lower level, including an uncovered junction box containing a twisted conductor splice used for a temporary lighting tap, moisture exposure, overloaded temporary lighting circuits, and the absence of ground fault protection on the affected line. Local broadcast guidelines were later updated to require certified electrical clearance, restricted area barriers, and licensed electricians on site for all live remote productions in older structures. It was August 17, 2013, in Miami, Florida. A live morning television segment was underway in the outdoor parking area of a regional broadcast studio, where a heat endurance stunt had been set up for continuous on-air coverage. A transparent, custom-built sauna enclosure stood on a raised platform, surrounded by cameras, lighting stands, and monitoring screens displaying internal temperature and elapsed time. Rebecca Martinez, 29, was the program's co-host and a regular participant in challenge-based segments designed to boost ratings and viewer engagement. She had built a reputation for completing physically demanding stunts on air, including endurance dances and food challenges. For this broadcast, she proposed an extended sauna endurance attempt tied to a charity fundraiser and an unofficial record benchmark. Production planning documents describe the segment as high risk but manageable with medical standby, hydration supply, and continuous visual monitoring. The enclosure was a modified heat chamber, built with thick, transparent polycarbonate panels and a framed door fitted with an outward opening latch and magnetic seal. Portable heaters and steam units were positioned outside the chamber and vented inward through heat-rated ducts. A digital sensor array displayed air temperature and humidity on a broadcast overlay. Target temperature was set between 165 to 170 degrees Fahrenheit, within the upper operating range of commercial saunas, but higher than typical televised demonstrations. On-site medics were assigned to observe for heat illness indicators and were authorized to recommend termination if preset thresholds were crossed. Rebecca entered the chamber shortly after 9 a.m., wearing light athletic clothing and a biometric wrist monitor. Water bottles and electrolyte drinks were placed inside within reach. During the first 90 minutes, she remained alert and responsive, periodically signaling status to the crew through hand gestures and brief microphone responses. Internal readings showed stable temperature but rising humidity, as steam output accumulated faster than expected under the sealed configuration. Later review found the chamber's ventilation slot had been partially obstructed by a camera cable repositioned for a tighter shot. As the second hour passed, Rebecca's movement slowed and her posture changed from upright to seated against the rear panel. According to the medic log, her gestures became less consistent and response delays increased. These signs were initially attributed to normal fatigue under heat exposure. The stunt clock remained active because her biometric readings, though elevated, had not yet crossed the automatic abort threshold set during pre-show planning. Near the 2-hour mark, Rebecca attempted to stand and lost balance. The live camera feed showed uncoordinated movement followed by collapse onto the chamber floor. The supervisor ordered an immediate stop. When crew attempted to open the door, the magnetic seal did not release on the first trigger. Heat expansion along the frame increased seal pressure, requiring a manual override pull from the hinge side. Entry was gained after several seconds, and medics removed her from the chamber and began active cooling procedures on site before transport. Martinez was pronounced dead at the hospital later that day. The medical report listed exertional heat stroke with multi-organ complications as the cause of death. The post-incident review cited contributing factors including elevated humidity from restricted ventilation, abort threshold set too high for a sealed environment, and a door seal design that did not account for thermal expansion under sustained peak heat. Broadcast safety guidance issued afterward required redundant ventilation clearance checks, lower automatic abort limits, and non-magnetic quick-release door hardware for all live heat endurance segments. It was December 14, 2017, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. A live early morning television segment was underway in the outdoor lot of a regional news station, where a winter survival demonstration had been set up for continuous broadcast coverage. Portable shelters, heaters, and weather instruments were arranged behind the presenter to compare different cold weather protection methods under real conditions. Air temperature measured -18 degrees Fahrenheit, with sustained wind producing wind chills near -40 degrees Fahrenheit. Jennifer Walsh, 32, was a field reporter assigned to the station's public safety and weather features. She had several years of experience reporting in severe winter conditions and had completed certified cold weather safety training courses. Producers approved the segment as an educational demonstration, showing how layering systems, wind barriers, and emergency shelters function in extreme cold. The original safety plan called for rotating on-air exposure in short intervals, with scheduled warm-up breaks inside a heated vehicle between segments. Pre-show planning notes outlined strict limits, no more than 15 minutes of continuous exposure per cycle, and mandatory medical check-ins after each return indoors. However, the live format combined multiple scheduled hits into a single extended block due to programming delays earlier that morning. Instead of rotating out, Jennifer remained outside to maintain visual continuity, while the cameraman and audio technician rotated through warming periods. On-site medics monitored from a nearby vehicle and tracked visible indicators rather than continuous core temperature readings. The demonstration began shortly after 6 a.m., with Jennifer wearing insulated boots, layered thermal clothing, and a wind-resistant outer shell. She first showed how different glove types affected dexterity, then compared open exposure versus standing behind a portable windscreen. During the second hour, light snow began blowing across the lot, and wind gusts increased. Review findings later noted that her outer shell zipper had been partially open at the collar to accommodate a microphone cable, allowing repeated wind entry at the neck seal. Perspiration from repeated movement between props also dampened her inner base layer, reducing insulation efficiency. As exposure time accumulated beyond the original rotation limits, Jennifer's movements slowed and her hand coordination worsened. According to the medic log, she missed 2 scheduled warm-up breaks while continuing demonstrations of emergency blanket use and vehicle kits. Early hypothermia signs, reduced dexterity, and delayed responses were interpreted by crew as normal cold reaction for the segment's purpose. The live camera feed showed increasing speech slurring and shortened step length as she transitioned between stations. Near the end of the third hour on air, she attempted to reposition a wind barrier and stumbled. The live broadcast camera captured her losing balance and collapsing onto the packed snow surface. The control room immediately cut back to the studio, while field staff and medics reached her within moments. Passive and active rewarming measures were started on site, followed by rapid transport to a hospital. Walsh was pronounced dead later that day. The medical report listed severe accidental hypothermia with cardiac arrhythmia as the cause of death. The station's incident review concluded that extended continuous exposure beyond the planned rotation limits, wind intrusion at the collar opening, and moisture-degraded base layers combined to accelerate heat loss. Updated field broadcast protocols afterward required enforced exposure timers, mandatory rotation regardless of live scheduling changes, and continuous temperature monitoring for extreme cold demonstrations. Thanks for watching. Click the next video for more stories.